I want a divorce. I've found someone who actually makes me happy. That was the text my wife Donna sent me out of nowhere while she was supposedly attending a business conference. But what she didn't know was that in trying to disappear with our entire retirement savings, she walked right into the one system built to stop her, my system. I'm Nathan Bell, 45, a financial systems analyst based in Richmond, Virginia. I've spent the last 2 decades protecting corporations from fraud, but I never imagined I'd need to protect myself from the person I trusted most. Dana's plan wasn't emotional. It was cold, calculated, and executed through quiet weeks of secret planning. And yet it only took 7 words to try and end a 22-year marriage. What she didn't count on, the safeguards I'd embedded into our accounts. Automated flags, pattern detection, silent alerts. They weren't built for marriage. They were built for truth. She thought she'd beat me to the money. She never knew the system was watching the entire time. Over the next few minutes, I'll take you through a real-life unraveling of betrayal, deception, and the cold brilliance of a digital safety net designed not for revenge, but for justice. Stick with me, because what happened after that message, it didn't just save my future. It exposed something far bigger than a broken marriage. As I sat at my desk, still holding the coffee she didn't know would go cold that morning, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't just a goodbye. It was a digital confession, and the system she never saw coming, it had already begun responding. The moment Dana's second text came through my hands, froze above the keyboard. I've already transferred the retirement funds to my private account. You can have the house. I don't need it anymore. I didn't even feel the coffee mug slip from my fingers. It just landed on the desk with a dull thud. I opened our banking app immediately, a few digits in, and I saw it. The account balances were not what they should have been, but they weren't empty either. Not yet. Dana thought she had been smart fast. She didn't realize she had already triggered a chain of events that couldn't be undone. Everything we owned, financially, retirement, savings, brokerage, accounts, joint checking, even that so-called private account she opened, ran through a consolidated financial monitoring system I had built myself. Originally, I designed it to flag anomalies across multiple platforms for corporate clients. After I saw how easily internal fraud could destroy companies from the inside out, I decided to mirror those safeguards in our personal finances. Not out of suspicion, out of habit. I never imagined it would be my own wife trying to break the system. When Dana initiated those transfers, she tripped 5 separate fraud detection triggers. The algorithms didn't care about her name on the accounts or our marriage certificate. They just saw over $800,000 moving in irregular patterns in a short time frame without dual authorization. That's all it took. At 10:52 a.m., the federal safeguards kicked in. Every flag deposit to the external account was immediately frozen under automatic review, pending a fraud investigation. No manual input needed. The system worked exactly as it was designed to. I didn't say a word to anyone, didn't yell, didn't call her, didn't even send a follow-up text. I just watched it unfold like a slow-motion train wreck she had no idea was already being recorded from every angle. On one screen, I watched the flags pile up. On another, I monitored the account status changes as the receiving bank's compliance team initiated a formal review. By noon, I'd received 3 separate alerts from the institution she used. Deposits frozen, under audit, potential fraud activity detected. It wasn't just stopped. It was sealed off completely. The irony didn't escape me. For 22 years, I'd built our life around protecting the future, carefully calculating investments, triple-checking taxes, locking down every weak point in our finances. I thought I was doing it for us. Turns out I was doing it to save myself from her. And even though I was staring at the collapse of a 2-decade marriage, I didn't feel rage. What I felt was the precision of it all. Her betrayal wasn't messy or impulsive. It was organized, cold, like a closing statement in a deal she thought I'd never review. What Dana didn't know was that her so-called private account wasn't private at all. She had linked it to our shared login to access funds more easily. That alone created an audit trail I could trace in minutes. She might have thought she was ahead of me. She wasn't. The financial ecosystem she tried to exploit was one I had architected from the ground up. Every IP address, login timestamp, and transaction history had been mapped. That afternoon I reviewed every transaction going back 6 months. There were warning signs I had missed small deliberate withdrawals, payments, labeled vaguely new credit accounts, opened without discussion. She'd started staging this exit quietly. I'd been too focused on client portfolios and project deadlines to catch it. I used to believe that building strong systems meant you never had to worry. Now I knew better. Systems catch data. They don't catch silence. By 3 p.m. I had already compiled a full transfer report and alerted our family attorney just in case, not to retaliate, just to prepare. I still hadn't spoken to Dana. There was nothing to say. She made her move. She just didn't expect the system to make one back. My phone lit up again, but not from her. It was another compliance alert. Her third attempt at rerouting funds had failed. The fraud locks were tightening. That night I cooked dinner in silence, my appetite gone. The house was too quiet, like it already knew something had shifted. I sat at the dining room table eating, alone across from her empty chair. It used to be a place of warmth, wine glasses, soft laughter, late-night work talk. Now it was a crime scene. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. As I checked the final logs before heading to bed, I saw her last failed attempt. She had tried to reverse a transfer, likely panicked by the lockout. The system stopped her cold. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of heartbreak, because of clarity. The system had protected everything: our retirement, our savings, our future. It had done what I built it to do. But what it couldn't protect was the part of me that still wondered how someone you love could look you in the eye for years and plan to disappear the moment you blinked. The next morning came without a word from her. But I already knew Dana had no idea the worst hadn't even happened yet. She thought losing the money was the end of it. She didn't realize the system had just started talking, and it was about to reveal something she couldn't talk her way out of. Friday morning, 11:32 a.m. My phone rang with a name I hadn't seen since Tuesday. Dana. I didn't answer. It rang again. Then came the voicemail, short and sharp. Nathan, my card's not working. I can't access anything. What did you do? I didn't need to do anything. The system did all the work. She thought transferring funds would be as simple as clicking a button and vanishing into the next chapter of her life. What she didn't realize was that financial systems don't run on emotion. They run on verification, rules, compliance. And she had violated every single one. I finally picked up her third call, mostly out of curiosity. Her voice was tense with that layered tone she used when her marketing presentations went off, script-controlled panic, hiding behind feigned calm. "What's going on?" she asked. "What's your balance?" I replied. "Zero. It says 0. I transferred it. Where is it?" Her words were more accusation than confusion. I waited a beat. The fraud detection system flagged unusual activity. The funds were frozen pending investigation. Silence. I heard her breathing then. How long? 5 to 7 business days, maybe longer depending on the findings. Then she hung up. She didn't argue. That silence told me more than words ever could. She was caught, and she knew it. That moment wasn't about the money. It was about control. and she had lost it. If you've ever experienced a betrayal that flips your world overnight, hit the like button. Share your story in the comments. Sometimes it's not the loss that hurts. It's realizing someone you loved thought they could outmaneuver you and got caught. The rest of Friday passed in a haze of muted emails and system alerts. I stared out the office window longer than I should have. I thought back to our early years when we were just two kids from Petersburg, chasing college dreams and counting quarters for date nights. We built everything together from scratch. I never imagined she'd want to burn it down for a fast exit. What really unsettled me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how clean and mechanical her attempt had been. No goodbye, no warning, just a couple of texts and a few digital transactions. It wasn't heartbreak. It was strategy. She treated our marriage like a liability on her balance sheet, something to liquidate. And that more than anything revealed how long she'd been planning this. This wasn't a bad decision made in a moment of weakness. This was methodical. That night I stood in the guest room, the same room she'd casually said was too cluttered 2 weeks earlier. At the time I brushed it off. Now it clicked. She was preparing for no return. I opened the closet, ran my hand along the rack of jackets and winter scarves, half empty now. I spotted a gap in her side of the wardrobe that hadn't been there the week before. A quiet kind of absence. She'd taken just enough to travel without raising suspicion, but not enough to seem gone. Every piece was a calculated decision. Saturday morning I met with my lawyer. William Brooks had handled estate planning for some of our older relatives, and I knew he was methodical, patient, the kind of man who didn't flinch when things got messy. I handed him a printed folder, transaction logs, fraud alert, screenshots, timestamps, system-generated emails. "You already have everything we need," he said, after 20 minutes of flipping through. "File now. Don't wait. Attempted financial misconduct gives you a strong position." I didn't hesitate. By noon, the divorce filing was in motion. No requests for alimony. No division of untouched assets. I wasn't interested in punishment. I just wanted clarity. I left the joint checking account untouched with the remaining $3,000. That's all she had access to now. It wasn't revenge. It was simply fair. She had wanted out. I gave her the exit she designed. That afternoon I found myself back at the dining table with a legal pad. Not for numbers, for questions. When had she stopped loving me? When had she started seeing our marriage as a transaction? Was it during one of those late business trips? Was it the night she asked about our retirement totals over dinner, playing with her wine glass while pretending to be just curious? I wanted to believe she struggled with it. That maybe guilt had weighed on her. But looking at the precision of her moves, I saw no hesitation in them. No mistakes. She only failed because she underestimated the very thing I built to protect us. The irony was suffocating. Later that night, my sister called. She had visited for Thanksgiving, had mentioned how off Dana seemed. Distant, she said. I dismissed it as work stress at the time. Now I wondered how many signals I had missed, how many patterns I ignored, because I wanted to believe we were still okay. Funny how a man who could detect invisible trends in million-dollar corporate systems couldn't see the cracks in his own home. If you've ever ignored the signs because you loved someone too much to see the truth, subscribe for more stories like this. Your trust doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. Sunday morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I cleaned out the entire guest room. Not out of anger, out of necessity. I boxed up Dana's books, her old conference lanyards, her framed certificates. Everything she left behind became evidence not for court, but for me. Evidence of a life that had quietly expired. But as I slid the final drawer closed, something struck me. This wasn't just about Dana. Not anymore. There was more to this, more than marriage, more than betrayal. I could feel it in the logs, in the timing of her withdrawals, in the patterns she thought were invisible. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much bigger unraveling. And the first clue came that very Monday morning. Monday morning came quietly, the way significant days often do. No thunder, no ominous soundtrack. Just sunlight through the blinds, coffee brewing, like any other start to the week. But as I opened my laptop and reviewed the fraud system's logs, something I did out of habit, rather than need, I saw something strange. A new flag. The system had picked up 3 recent credit card applications using our joint address, all filed within a 48-hour period, all under Dana's name, all denied. The reason for denial wasn't hard to guess. With an open fraud investigation tied to her name and multiple flagged transfers, her credit profile was frozen. But what struck me wasn't just that she was trying to open new cards. It was how quickly she pivoted to find another angle. She wasn't reaching out to apologize. She was doubling down, trying to rebuild liquidity before the walls closed in. She was still playing the game, thinking there was a move left. If you found out your ex was still trying to move money after being caught, what would you do? Would you tell the bank? Would you stay silent? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Mid-morning, I received a call that made it official. Patricia Martinez, Dana's attorney. I remembered her from neighborhood barbecues, always the one telling funny stories about legal loopholes and gray areas in divorce court. Now she was calling on behalf of the woman who had tried to steal nearly $1 million from me. Nathan. She began, her voice coated in performative calm. We need to discuss Dana's access to emergency funds. She's in a difficult position. She's welcome to use the joint checking, I replied flatly. $3,000 is sitting there untouched. That's hardly reasonable. Patricia pushed. She needs more than that to live. She thought $800,000 was a reasonable transfer without consent, I said. The line went quiet. She hung up. By early afternoon, I received another call, one I didn't expect. Alan Murphy, Dana's boss at Valerie Marketing Group. We had met a few times at company events. He was cordial, efficient. This time his voice held a quiet tension. Nathan, he said, I wanted to confirm, was Dana really at the Dallas conference last week? I blinked. That's what she told me. We've been checking our records, Alan said. HR has no registration for her at the event, and her corporate card activity doesn't align with our travel policy. We also noticed some inconsistencies in her last 2 expense reports. The room seemed to shift slightly around me. I can't speak to that, I replied. You'd have to ask her. We've tried. She's not returning calls. But if you hear from her, never mind. Thank you, Nathan. I ended the call, set the phone down, and stared at the wall. She hadn't just betrayed me personally. She was crossing lines professionally. And suddenly I could feel the next layer of the story peeling back. What if the money she tried to move wasn't just ours? What if this wasn't just about retirement and savings, but something larger, something corporate? When trust breaks down, it rarely does so in one place. If she was lying about the conference, manipulating expense reports, applying for unauthorized cards, what else had she touched? For 22 years, Dana had watched me build frameworks to detect fraud. And now it was clear she'd been studying them, too. Not to help, to figure out what they couldn't catch. If you discovered your partner had not only betrayed you, but possibly committed corporate fraud as well, how far would you go to expose the truth? Share your thoughts below. That evening I sat back down at my home office. I pulled up archived access logs and security reports. I wasn't doing it out of vengeance. I needed clarity. I searched her IP history, looked at timestamps. Something didn't feel right. She had logged into our shared portfolio at odd hours, 2:17 a.m., 3:41 a.m. times when she claimed to be asleep beside me. She'd accessed reports, downloaded spreadsheets, quiet surgical steps toward an exit strategy. I used to think of her as a brilliant strategist in marketing, but now I saw her differently. She hadn't just absorbed the surface-level insights of my work. She had learned how to mask digital footprints, route around tripwires. She thought she could outsmart a system designed by someone who'd spent years anticipating bad behavior. Around midnight, I received one more notification, a failed login attempt on our investment account from an unrecognized device blocked by two-factor authentication. The system emailed me immediately. I didn't even have to act. It was already doing its job. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flicker of the security alert on the screen. Dana wasn't giving up. She was still pushing at the walls, hoping one would fall. But she didn't realize those walls weren't just mine. They belonged to every client, every system, every lesson I'd built over 2 decades. The next morning would confirm what I already feared, that this story wasn't just personal anymore. Someone else was watching, and they were about to ask questions Dana couldn't answer. Tuesday morning arrived not with answers, but with more questions. My phone buzzed just after 9 a.m., a name I hadn't expected. James Everett, our realtor. We hadn't spoken since he helped us close on the house 5 years earlier. His voice was cordial but cautious. "Nathan, sorry to bother you, but something's come up. A buyer reached out, claiming to represent you and your wife. They're asking about listing your property. Offered a full cash deal at $300,000. I paused. 300? I asked. 3. The home is worth nearly 5 now, I know James said. That's why I called. It didn't sound right. They said you two wanted a quick sale, claimed it was pre-agreed. My stomach turned. Dana again. But this wasn't just desperation for liquid assets. This was strategy, something she and whoever she was working with had mapped out months ago. I asked James if he had a name on the inquiry. He hesitated. Thomas Wade. And there it was. The name clicked instantly. Thomas worked at Valerie Marketing. I'd met him once briefly at Dana's holiday party. Middle management, smooth-talking, too confident. Now it all made sense. Dana hadn't just betrayed me emotionally or financially. She had enlisted a co-conspirator. They were trying to move our house at its 5-year-old purchase price, flip it privately, pocket the difference, and disappear. If someone you loved plotted to steal your home right under you, what would you do? Would you report them or confront them first? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear how others would handle this. I ended the call, called my attorney, and relayed everything. William Brooks didn't flinch. "You're seeing the tail end of a bigger scheme," he said. "We need to document everything, every inquiry, every name, every call." Then he gave me the contact for someone at the Richmond Financial Crimes Unit. By Wednesday morning, I was sitting across from Detective Sarah Flynn. She was sharp-eyed, focused, the kind of professional who'd heard more than her share of financial betrayal stories. "You're not the first," she said, "but your case is cleaner than most." She opened a manila folder and laid out a map, 12 dots across Virginia. "We've been tracking a pattern. These dots. They're all homeowners, current, or former employees of Valerie Marketing. Their homes were listed at significantly lower values, often through private channels. Flipped. Profits disappeared." I leaned back in the chair, processing what I was hearing. Dana wasn't just trying to steal from me. She had been part of a network, a quiet machine, that targeted the people she and Thomas had access to. Internal records, personal addresses, salaries. And my house, our house, was on that list. Sarah continued. "Your fraud system caught patterns our department didn't even flag. That's why we want your help reviewing transfer activity timing logs and any access records you can share." I agreed, immediately. The hurt, the betrayal, all of it shifted into focus. This wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping something that was still active. The system I built to protect one family now had the power to help a dozen others. For once, the math was working in favor of the right side. That night I returned home with a USB drive full of case files and my own documentation. I sat at the same desk where I'd first read Dana's text and started building a different kind of timeline. Every login, every transaction, every real estate inquiry flagged to our name. The more I pieced together, the clearer it became. Dana had turned her knowledge of my systems into a blueprint, not to avoid being caught, but to walk the line just close enough without triggering alarms. She miscalculated. Thursday morning brought the fallout. Patricia Martinez filed an emergency court motion requesting access to the frozen retirement funds, citing Donna's inability to sustain basic living conditions. The judge called for a hearing the next day. I wasn't surprised. It was another desperate move in a long line of attempts to unlock what wasn't hers to begin with. I gathered every piece of evidence, screen captures, flagged alerts, bank communications. William and I prepared for a short hearing, expecting pushback. But something unexpected happened that night. Dana texted me. "I'm sorry it came to this. No excuses, no explanations, just that." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering above the screen. But what was there to say? Apologies don't rebuild trust, and forgiveness doesn't erase blueprints drawn for theft. I locked the phone and set it down. Friday morning arrived gray and silent. In court, Dinah looked smaller. Not just physically. There was a fragility to her I hadn't seen before. The confident, charming woman I'd once loved now sat stiffly beside her attorney, glancing sideways as if the courtroom itself might collapse. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. When he finally spoke, it was decisive. Access to the joint checking account is sufficient for basic needs until the investigation concludes. Motion for further access is denied. Dana didn't argue. She just stood, nodded, and walked out without looking back. No parting glance, no breakdown, just distance. Outside the courthouse, I exhaled for the first time that day. The system held. The facts held. And even though I'd lost a marriage, I'd gained something else, perspective. But as I returned to work that afternoon, a new call came in. One that would shift everything again. A federal investigator had found something bigger. Something beyond retirement funds and real estate fraud. Dana's story wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. It was Monday afternoon when Gregory Harris walked into my office. He wore a dark gray suit, government-issued ID clipped to his lapel, and the kind of calm that only comes from years of reading people who lie for a living. "Mr. Bell," he said, offering a firm handshake, "I'm with Eastern Financial Compliance. We need to talk about your wife." My body tensed. I'd spent weeks untangling Dana's betrayal, emotional, financial, legal, but something about the way he said your wife told me we weren't just talking about marital assets anymore. We stepped into the conference room and he placed a thick folder on the table. "We've been running an internal audit based on several automated flags, your systems, actually," he said, offering a slight nod. "It's led us to patterns we hadn't seen. Dana's name keeps coming up." He opened the folder. Inside were wire logs, access records, internal memos. The numbers didn't lie. "What are you looking at exactly?" I asked. Gregory didn't blink. Corporate theft. Siphoning of marketing funds through layered personal accounts. So far, we estimate at least $2 million was diverted over the past 18 months. Most of the activity can be traced to Dana's work terminal and Thomas Wade's shared approvals. It felt like my chest hollowed out. While I had been reviewing dinner receipts and bank statements, she had been running a coordinated embezzlement scheme right under everyone's nose. And worst of all, she used the same attention to detail she'd watched me perfect over years of financial systems work, not to build something honest, but to construct a criminal network. Have you ever discovered someone you loved was capable of something much darker than you imagined? How did you react? Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes the truth reveals people we never really knew. Gregory laid out their plan. Donna and Thomas had created a shadow budgeting line under the guise of vendor promotions. From there, they rerouted micro-transfers into shell accounts tied to consulting services that didn't exist. Each transfer was just below the corporate alert threshold. It was smart, quiet, until the system I'd written designed to catch unusual timing and pattern breaks flagged it for cumulative activity. You didn't just protect yourself, Gregory said. Your system might have saved your company from a multi-million-dollar loss. But we'll need your help. We need proof you weren't involved. I nodded. You'll have it. That evening I pulled every relevant log from the home archive, timestamps, alert chains, user access reports. I cross-referenced them against Dana's work emails, which I had limited access to due to our shared devices. What I found was chilling. Her access spiked whenever I traveled. The patterns were perfect. She hadn't just watched me build the system, she had learned how to maneuver around its blind spots, the ones designed to trust insiders. Tuesday morning, I submitted a full audit trail to the compliance division. I also met with William, my attorney, and turned over the same records. He scanned the pages slowly, his brow furrowing. This goes way beyond divorce court, he said. Federal charges are coming. Wire fraud, conspiracy, maybe RICO if they connect this to more employees. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt exhausted, because no system, no matter how advanced, prepares you for the emotional wreckage that comes from realizing someone you built a life with was building a lie inside your life. The house we bought, the savings we stacked, the vacations we budgeted for, every one of them existed next to a woman who was planning an escape route with stolen money. Wednesday morning, I received one more signal Dana hadn't finished trying. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Dana is requesting a conference. She wants to propose a deal in light of federal involvement. My first instinct was to refuse. I owed her nothing, but something about it felt different, like she finally understood this wasn't going away. We met virtually that afternoon. Donna looked tired. Her eyes weren't defensive anymore, just sunken hollow. They're talking about indictments, she said. They think I took millions. I didn't respond. They're asking if I'll cooperate, give names, evidence. They said it could reduce sentencing. Still, I said nothing. I never meant for it to go this far, she said quietly. That's when I looked straight at the screen. You never meant to get caught. If you were in my shoes, would you accept an apology from someone who weaponized your trust for their own gain? Let me know in the comments below, because some wounds don't close with words. They close with accountability. After the call, I forwarded all my documentation to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I made it clear I hadn't built any of this for revenge. I built it for security. But when people cross lines, systems don't care about intentions. They care about facts. By Thursday, the full weight of what she'd done began surfacing. Dana had listed 12 properties under review in her personal planner. Our house was just one of them. She and Thomas had orchestrated a system-wide real estate scam tied to insider data. 12 families, 12 homes, all exposed through the same digital trails she thought would stay buried. That night I stood in our former guest room, now cleared of her belongings, and stared at the place where she once kept her travel bags. Every detail of the past few weeks settled into place. She wasn't just running from a marriage. She was trying to vanish into a different life built on other people's money. But now the walls were closing in. Her schemes weren't just collapsing. They were being documented, catalogued, and prepared for court. And the next step wouldn't be another message, another lie. It would be the cold formality of federal indictment. Friday morning, just before 10 a.m., the official notice arrived. Federal indictments had been issued. Donna Thomas Wade and 5 additional Valerie marketing employees were charged with orchestrating an organized financial fraud scheme that spanned multiple departments, multiple companies, and multiple states. The charges were staggering wire fraud conspiracy to commit fraud, corporate embezzlement, and attempted property theft. The final detail, though, is what stopped me cold under federal flight risk guidelines. Bail was denied. Dana would remain incarcerated pending trial. That night my phone buzzed again. A text from a federal holding facility. Dana had written, "I never meant for it to go this far." I stared at those words for longer than I should have. No explanation, no ownership. Just a feeble attempt to justify collapse. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a blueprint of calculated theft. And now, for the first time, she had no escape route. Have you ever reached a point where someone's apology just didn't matter anymore? What do you do with it? Do you respond, or do you leave it there unanswered? Let me know in the comments. I want to know how others find closure. I finally replied after a full hour. "You never meant to get caught." I pressed send and didn't look at my phone again that night. Saturday morning brought a new legal update. The U.S. Attorney's Office offered Dana and the other defendants a plea deal, reduced sentencing in exchange for full cooperation, and detailed disclosure of the operation structure. William, my attorney, called to debrief me. "They'll want you to testify again," he said. "Not just about the financial systems. They want your perspective on her character, marital conduct, the whole timeline." I felt a strange hollowness. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even grieving. I was just processing. 22 years of memories reduced now to trial exhibits and legal briefings. That weekend, I cleared out her office in the house. Everything went into boxes, marketing brochures, binders, notebooks, loose receipts. In the bottom drawer, I found it. A spiral notebook filled with handwritten real estate targets, 12 addresses, market values, owner profiles, all of them current or former Valerie employees. There in black ink, our home was listed as primary test property. That discovery hit harder than any text message or courtroom accusation. It wasn't just betrayal. It was study, analysis, pre-planning. Dana had used everything she learned from living with me, financial awareness, behavioral data, risk management, and applied it toward an exit strategy that mirrored corporate fraud operations. She hadn't just drifted into this. She had designed it. Monday morning divorce proceedings resumed. Her incarceration complicated the logistics, but her public defender, now replacing Patricia, brought a clear message. Dana is prepared to concede all marital property in exchange for a statement of character from you. Something to humanize her to the court. I looked at William, then back at the courtroom ceiling. Character. After she staged a financial heist on her own husband and 12 other families, after she pretended to be on a business trip while laying the foundation for a real estate scam. My answer was simple. I've already testified about what I know. That's all I have to give. William filed the final papers. The house remained mine. The retirement funds, fully restored after months of litigation, were secured under an additional layer of protection. Modest alimony was rejected outright. No contest. Her guilty plea made it irrelevant. The court signed the divorce decree with clinical efficiency. No emotion, just ink and silence. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail, postmarked from the jail. It was Dana. The same looping cursive she used to write anniversary cards now carried something entirely different. I got lost in the money she wrote, started seeing how easy it was. Thomas said your system could be worked around. I believed him over you. I'm sorry. I didn't cry. I didn't even read it twice. I filed it in the same cabinet that held all the legal records. It wasn't forgiveness. It was evidence of intent and of failure. And maybe for me a quiet confirmation that I hadn't imagined all of it. If someone who betrayed you sent a final apology, would you read it? Would you forgive them? Would you burn it? Let me know how you would handle that moment. Later that week, I received notice from Gregory Harris that the federal trial date had been set. He thanked me for my full cooperation, then handed me a copy of the indictment documents. As I flipped through them, I saw the list of cooperating witnesses, the timeline of stolen transfers, the internal surveillance Dana had unknowingly triggered each time she logged into her company portal from home. There in detail was the entire unraveling. Dana didn't just break the law. She underestimated how resilient digital systems can be when built for integrity, not convenience. And no matter how familiar she was with my processes, she missed the most important rule. No system works in your favor when you lie to it. I looked around my now quiet house. No more guest room clutter, no conference call echoes, just stillness and structure. The systems had held even when the marriage didn't. But the story wasn't over yet. I still had one more place to speak the truth, on the witness stand, in front of a jury. And this time, the world would hear everything. The federal courthouse in Richmond stood like a monument to silence, glass stone, and rules. It was the kind of place where emotion didn't matter, only evidence. And that's exactly what I carried with me as I stepped through the metal detectors, a folder in hand, my name already on the witness list. Testimony day, the culmination of months of digital footprints, frozen accounts, sleepless nights, and a marriage disassembled by secrets and transactions. Inside the courtroom, Dana sat quietly at the defense table. Gone were the tailored blazers and confident posture. Her shoulders were hunched, now her hands folded tightly in her lap. No eye contact, just focus on the table. I didn't need her to look at me. She'd already said everything she needed to when she moved the money. The prosecutor started with the technicals. Mr. Bell, can you explain what your financial monitoring system does? I took a breath. Then I did what I'd done for years, presented clearly with precision. It's a behavior-based fraud detection system, I said. It monitors joint accounts, maps transaction behavior flags, outliers and autolocks, transfers over set thresholds without dual authorization. They walked me through it, how I built it, why I built it, and how it caught the attempted transfer of $800,000 from our shared retirement accounts. I presented printouts, login logs, and real-time alerts. I showed how the system tracked device IDs, location changes, and withdrawal attempts that didn't match prior behavior patterns. Were any of these actions done manually by you? The prosecutor asked. No. All alerts were automatic. No human override was required. That was the moment the courtroom leaned in. Because it wasn't about revenge, it was about math. Systems, protocols, not emotion. Have you ever built something? A routine, a system, a habit that ended up protecting you from someone you never thought you'd need protection from? Tell me in the comments. I'm always curious how people guard what matters. The defense attorney stood. His strategy was subtle, not combative. "Mr. Bell, did you ever monitor your wife's personal accounts without her knowledge?" I didn't hesitate. "No. I only monitored joint accounts and accounts connected to our household assets." He nodded, trying to humanize Dana in his cross. "And when did you begin to suspect that your wife was involved in corporate misconduct?" That question didn't shake me. When her boss called to ask why she wasn't at the conference, she claimed to be attending. There it was, the moment the lie broke through the personal and became professional. I saw jurors shift. Some leaned forward. Others looked at Dana with an entirely new lens. It wasn't just a spouse making poor choices. It was a professional dismantling her credibility transaction by transaction. Later that afternoon, the prosecution played recorded calls. One from Dana's corporate email backup, her voice clear as ever, laughing softly. "Nathan's too focused on his own systems. He'll never check my work accounts." You could hear the confidence in her tone. The kind of confidence that only comes when you've spent years watching someone build walls and believe you know where the cracks are. But there weren't any cracks, just her underestimation. That night I walked out of the courthouse into the early September air lighter than I had felt in months. The system had held, and so had I. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The trial was scheduled to run another 2 weeks. I wasn't required to attend every day, but I did. I needed to hear it, all of it. The details Dana never told me. The scheme Thomas Wade laid out under oath in his plea deal. The list of employees who knew or suspected something was off. Each day stripped another layer off the life I thought we had built together. On the 12th day, Thomas cracked, offered full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence, 7 years instead of 25. He gave them everything: how the money moved, who signed off, who looked the other way, and at the center of the entire operation, Dana. She didn't just play a role. She ran the numbers, tracked the balances, made sure the embezzled funds blended into legitimate company activity. She learned that from me. But she used it for everything I fought against. Can you imagine teaching someone everything about how to protect something, only for them to turn it into a weapon? What would you do if someone used your own knowledge to destroy the thing you thought was safe? The final piece of evidence was devastating. A video call log between Dana and Thomas discussing a staged home listing under my name. The buyer would present as a family friend. The property would sell for $300,000. It would flip 6 weeks later for market value. "Nathan doesn't check the real estate records unless it's year-end," she said confidently. But she was wrong. I checked every day. As court adjourned that Friday, the prosecutor pulled me aside. "Your system didn't just catch fraud," she said. "It exposed a culture. We had no idea how deep it went." I nodded, saying nothing. My role in this wasn't to fight. It was to document, to confirm, to build a framework strong enough that they didn't need emotion to be effective. And while the courtroom now carried the weight of Dana's crimes, my home, once filled with doubt, was finally quiet. But the verdict hadn't been delivered yet. That would come soon. And whatever it revealed, it would mark the end of a chapter I never asked for, but would never forget. The jury took less than 3 hours. After nearly 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, digital audit trails, and confessions, they returned a unanimous verdict. Guilty. 12 counts of wire fraud. 8 counts of conspiracy. 2 counts of corporate embezzlement. The clerk read each charge slowly, and with every word I felt a strange kind of silence settle deeper inside me. Dana didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead as if hearing someone else's name being read aloud. I watched from the gallery, not because I wanted to see her fall, but because I needed to see it end. When the judge set the sentencing hearing for 6 weeks later, it felt like both everything and nothing. 18 years, that was the recommended federal sentence based on the charge stack. Thomas Wade got 9 after his full cooperation. The others would serve between 5 and 12, depending on their roles. Dana's attorney didn't request leniency. There was no legal ground left to stand on. That night I drove home in silence, hands locked at 10 and 2 on the wheel. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone. I needed space from the noise. In the quiet, I replayed Dana's words from that courtroom call, recording Nathan's too focused on his own systems. He'll never check my work accounts. What strikes hardest in betrayal isn't always the act. It's the confidence in believing you'd never notice, that they could use your kindness, your discipline, your loyalty against you. If someone you trusted not only lied, but bet on you not looking, how would that change the way you trust again? Comment below. I think a lot of people carry that kind of wound and never say a word. 2 months passed between the verdict and sentencing. I sold the house during that time. We bought it for $300,000 5 years ago. It sold for a little over $500,000 after closing costs. I didn't even walk through it one last time. I just signed the papers and let it go. I rented a 1-story home in Norfolk. No extra rooms, no guest closets, no space to keep pieces of a life that had ended. I kept my job at Orbos Union. Michelle Chang, my team leader, had shielded me from the office gossip while I testified. The week I returned, we launched a full overhaul of our fraud detection infrastructure based on everything my case had revealed. I added protocols specifically built to detect insider threats, especially among employees with financial clearance. Those updates would go on to prevent an estimated $3.4 million in attempted internal theft within a year. Michelle stopped by my desk one afternoon. "You didn't just protect your own future," she said. "You changed how we protect everyone else's." That moment hit harder than I expected, because that's all I ever tried to do. Not just with systems, but with the people I cared about. If you've ever taken something painful and turned it into something that protects others, tell your story in the comments. I think we underestimate how many lives that kind of work can quietly save. I started teaching part-time at Old Dominion University. A friend from the finance department invited me to lead a 2-day seminar. That turned into a full course. Financial fraud detection through design. Most of my students were older professionals, earning second certifications, mid-level auditors, former bank managers, retirees returning for curiosity. I taught using real cases, not just mine, but others too. I showed how systems can't feel, but they can still see. One of my key lessons: trust people, but trust your systems more. Because people change. Data doesn't lie. By then, Dana had written me 4 times from jail, letters each more apologetic than the last. I thought I could outsmart the numbers. Thomas said the system had weaknesses. I lost track of what we built. I never wrote back. I didn't tear them up either. I just filed them in the cabinet under D. Not for Dana. For documentation. They weren't apologies. They were admissions. On a late Thursday, I received a call from the Department of Justice. The restitution order had been approved. My retirement accounts were restored. Our former joint checking, now split, sat untouched, the $3,000 evenly divided. Donna's half was claimed by the state to pay part of her fines. Mine stayed where it always was, marked emergency. That weekend, I walked the beach near my new place. There was no symbolic closure, no moment where the waves washed it all away. Just me alone with my thoughts, surrounded by the rhythm of a world that didn't stop just because I had been broken open. Sometimes I think that's where healing starts, not with forgiveness, but with stability. Not with moving on, but with moving forward. A few days later, I received the final sentencing memo. Donna would serve 18 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility for at least 14. She would be transferred to a medium-security facility out of state. Thomas Wade had already begun his sentence. Of the 12 families targeted in the real estate scam, all received partial restitution, thanks to the evidence I had provided. The rest would come in time, piece by piece, as assets were liquidated. But as I read those final pages, one thought stuck with me. This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a case study in how well systems can hold when people don't. And in the courtroom, where emotion fades and facts remain, that distinction made all the difference. What Dana underestimated wasn't me. It was structure, order, and what comes next would prove just how powerful truth can be when it's backed by design. 3 months after Dana's sentencing, life didn't return to normal. It simply became quieter. My morning settled into a rhythm I hadn't known since long before the trial. Coffee at 6:30, emails by 7, a light jog around the Norfolk neighborhood before logging into the system from my home office. No alerts, no strange transfers, no surveillance on shared accounts. Just order, structure, predictability. I found peace not in the absence of pain, but in the reliability of process. It's a strange comfort realizing that systems, when designed well, will keep working, even when the people who mattered most are gone. There was a clarity to it, a logic that never betrayed me. One Friday morning, while preparing a guest lecture for my fraud detection course, a name popped up in my inbox I hadn't seen in years. James Everett, the realtor. Nathan just wanted you to know his message read one of the houses from the original 12 Dana had listed as a target. It finally sold. The owners were able to recover most of what they lost. They asked me to thank you. Your reports made the difference. I read that line twice, then sat back in my chair. That house had belonged to the Simons family, a retired couple in their late 60s who'd been unknowingly approached by a pre-approved buyer 4 months before Donna's arrest. They'd almost signed, almost sold for $2,000 below market value. The scheme would have cost them 1/3 of their retirement. But the automated alerts built into my system flagged the title transfer, routing back to a known IP address in the Valerie corporate network. That detail, one piece of metadata, triggered the cascade that stopped the sale. One line of code written late at night in my upstairs office may have saved someone else's future. If you've ever helped a stranger without even realizing it at the time, drop a comment below. Sometimes the systems we build reach further than we ever intend. That weekend, I met with a local nonprofit offering financial literacy workshops for seniors. They had heard about the case and invited me to speak. I hesitated at first, unsure if sharing my story in person, face to face, was something I was ready for, but something about those families stuck with me. So I showed up on a rainy Saturday morning and stood in front of a room filled with gray hair, warm smiles, and quiet notebooks. I didn't start with Dana. I started with patterns, with blind spots, with the fact that most financial fraud against older Americans begins with familiarity, someone they trust, someone inside their circle. Then I told them what happened to me. The details, the data, and the fallout. By the time I finished, you could hear nothing but steady breaths and pen strokes. One man raised his hand. "How did you know she was lying?" I answered honestly. "I didn't. But the system did. It noticed when behavior changed, even when I didn't want to believe it. That's why I built it, not to spy, but to protect." A woman near the back asked, "Would you ever trust someone again with that kind of access?" That question caught me, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I hadn't let myself think about it until then. Maybe I said, but the access would come second. The patterns come first now. If you've ever had to rebuild trust, brick by brick, with tighter boundaries and better instincts, how did you do it? Share your story in the comments. There's strength in learning from each other. The workshop led to more invitations. I spoke at 2 more centers than a regional banking seminar. Michelle, my team lead, joked that I was becoming a kind of financial safety evangelist. Maybe I was. But if my experience kept even one person from falling into the same trap, it felt worth it. Then came the unexpected. A letter from the Department of Justice, not addressed to me, but copied to me. Dana had submitted an early cooperation report. Not for sentence reduction, she was past that window, but as part of a restorative justice request. Inside it was a list of names. More companies, more partners, more accounts. She'd given up what was left to give. For the first time, her knowledge was used to help clean up the damage instead of creating it. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel moved. I just felt still. I forwarded the letter to Gregory Harris, the investigator who first showed up at my office almost a year earlier. He responded within hours. It helped. Another fraud cell unraveled. We've opened a new inquiry based on her statement. You started something important, Nathan. I didn't reply. Some messages are meant to land quietly. That night I sat by the water. The wind was colder now, the fall air taking hold. I thought about all the layers we wrap around ourselves, systems, routines, passwords, firewalls, hoping they'll protect us. And sometimes they do. But nothing can shield you from the weight of misplaced trust. Nothing stops the ache of looking back and wondering when things changed. But systems endure. That's the lesson. People falter, people lie, people disappoint. But structure, when designed with discipline, outlasts emotion. And in the space between heartbreak and logic, there's room to rebuild something better, something that holds. 3 years later, I had settled into something resembling peace. Not the loud, triumphant kind, the quiet kind, the kind you find in routines you don't have to question. Morning coffee in a kitchen I picked for its simplicity. A part-time teaching load at Old Dominion University, where I lectured twice a week, mostly to working professionals, and a job that still let me tinker with the very systems that had saved my life from unraveling any further. It surprised me how little I missed the old life. I thought I'd carry more of it with me, but grief has a strange half-life. It fades unevenly. Some days it disappears like fog. Other days it lingers in unexpected places, like seeing a car that looks like hers or hearing a song that used to play while we cooked. But the house was gone. The memories boxed and donated, and the systems she tried to beat had long since evolved. One of the newer features I had implemented in the corporate detection suite was something I called Trust Delta. It wasn't flashy. It didn't make headlines, but it tracked subtle changes in employee financial behavior and flagged inconsistencies, not just criminal, but behavioral shifts. The idea was simple. If you notice the change before it turns into a crisis, you can intervene, redirect, or at the very least, prepare. That tool alone helped save a small nonprofit in North Carolina from losing nearly $400,000. A new hire had begun rerouting grant money, one small invoice at a time. The system flagged it 3 days before their internal controls would have even noticed. That was the value of everything I had been through. It turned personal trauma into institutional protection. If you've ever taken something painful and turned it into something that served others, what was it? How did you make that shift? I'd love to hear in the comments, because those turning points are never obvious while you're standing in them. One afternoon after class, a student named Greg approached me. Mid-50s, soft-spoken, wore button-downs tucked in a little too neatly. Professor Bell, he said my daughter was almost scammed last month. She got one of those fake, urgent bank notices. She almost clicked. I smiled gently. Almost matters. It means the system or someone stepped in just in time. He paused. It was your system. She banks with one of the credit unions that licensed your software last year. That hit differently. Not because of ego, but because the ripple finally felt real. I shook his hand. Tell her to keep listening to the alerts. They're boring, until the one time they're not. That night I stopped by the marina. I didn't own a boat. I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. But I liked the smell of salt and the sound of rigging clinking softly against masts. The rhythm of it reminded me of data flow, repetitive, soothing, but always active. Life in its own way is a kind of system. Inputs, outputs, interruptions, restarts. On the drive home, I passed the new building that had replaced Valerie Marketing Group. Different name now, different logo, same lot. I didn't slow down, just noted it. The world moves on even when the people inside it fail. There were times I still got letters from Dana. Not often, maybe 1 or 2 a year. Sometimes she wrote about prison life. Sometimes she apologized again. Once she asked if I would ever visit. I didn't respond. Not out of hate, but because closure wasn't something I needed from her anymore. I found it in the spreadsheets, the systems, the emails from banks saying, "Your alert prevented a breach today." Forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't arrive in a conversation. It would show up in the absence of anger. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at a federal training seminar in D.C., the topic behavioral anchors in financial misconduct. It was dry, technical, but it mattered. As I stood behind the podium, walking a room full of agents and analysts through real case examples, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't reliving trauma. I was teaching through it. The data wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs to use. During the Q&A, someone in the back asked, "Would you do it all the same way again?" The system, the safeguards, the way you handled the divorce. It took me a second. Yes, I said. I'd build the same system. I'd double down on the same principles. Because what failed wasn't the code. What failed was trust. And the system responded exactly the way it was meant to when trust collapsed. What about you? Have you ever had to build your own form of protection when trust failed? Did it work? Or did it teach you something new? Share your insight. Someone out there is probably needing it more than you know. Later that evening, back in Norfolk, I reviewed a batch of new updates for a credit union client. One of the junior developers had implemented an alert format that triggered too frequently. It needed refining. Not every ping meant danger. Not every movement meant betrayal. The system had to know the difference between unusual and unacceptable. As I sat there tweaking code, something occurred to me, not about Dana or Thomas or any of it, but about life itself. You can't always stop damage, but you can control the response. You can determine what fails and what holds. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. 3 years ago, my life collapsed in the span of a few text messages. I lost a marriage, a future I thought was secure, and the version of myself that believed love alone could shield you from betrayal. But what I gained in the wreckage was something I never expected: clarity. When Dana tried to disappear with everything we had built together, it wasn't rage that kept me grounded. It was structure. Systems don't feel, but they respond. And when everything else failed, mine stood firm. I've spent every day since then rebuilding, not to replace what was lost, but to understand what really matters. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in small things: a quiet morning without an alert, a student grasping a difficult concept, a saved retirement fund that might have otherwise vanished into someone else's lie. The life I live now is simpler, but it's stronger. There's no bitterness, just precision. No vengeance, just vigilance. I no longer view betrayal as the end of something. It's the unveiling of what was already broken. Trust isn't about closing your eyes and hoping for the best. It's about paying attention. It's about designing protections, not because you expect the worst, but because you respect what you've built. That lesson cost me dearly, but I carry it now like armor. If this story meant something to you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even rethink how you protect what matters, drop a comment below. Tell me what you've learned through your own storms. And if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, these aren't just stories. They're real lessons from real lives told so that someone else might avoid the same pain. I share them because systems may run on data, but lives run on experience, and every lesson passed forward is one more safeguard in someone else's future. That's why you should stay. That's why you should subscribe. Because stories like this aren't just worth hearing, they're worth learning from.